Alright, what's up everybody? So today's video, the title is entirely inspired by Miss Basement because the one thing she always says when I come home from the gym or come upstairs from the basement is, "It's insane how jacked you are." And I would never tell her to tell me that. She just willingly says that basically every time. So first off, we got a physique update, and following this, we have an upper body workout that I do want to show you guys a little bit of my technique, some of my exercise selection, and most importantly, just try and teach you little tidbits of information here and there throughout the entire session. So before I really get into anything that way, I do just want to say thanks to everybody that reached out to me after my last community post. Anybody from viewers of the channel, OG fans, other creators, and my clients as well. I had a bunch of people reach out, and it really was just cool to have that kind of all that community support and all that feedback. It really does mean a lot because, of course, as I mentioned in that post, some of these things have just been getting a little bit in my head, and I don't want to prevent things from letting me utilize, I guess, my creative outlet, because I know it's good for me to talk about these ideas, and more importantly, it's good for you guys to basically just hopefully learn a few new things and at least keep the natural community building and going strong. So I think it's important all around, and by no means am I going to like stop posting or anything. I'm just trying to figure a couple things out. So I'm in the commercial gym today. The reason I'm here is because my basement flooded yet again, so that was definitely an exciting thing to have happen again. Back in the commercial gym now. So there is a Smith machine. It is angled, which isn't my usual press. So since this Smith machine actually has counterweights too, I have to load it way heavier than I normally do because the bar weighs much less. I think the bar at my normal gym is 60 pounds or so, and this one's probably 15, 30, something in that range. So basically, we're moving on from the press onto the single arm lat biased rows. What I want you guys to focus on here is how I'm keeping my shoulder down. So my shoulder blade and my shoulder itself are depressed, they're kept down, and I'm keeping my elbow tight to my side. I'm not rowing up to my shoulder, I'm not flaring my elbow. This is a good example of a lat biased row. So these horizontal rows like this are going to work basically the entire lat, but it is going to put a little bit of emphasis on that upper lat region. And something like this, you can push it incredibly hard. You can probably even get away with training it harder than I am here. Of course, I'm training at 2-0 RIR. You can argue there was some cheat on those last couple of reps, but on rows, especially since they're so short and biased, meaning that most tension is placed when you're in the peak contraction, that means you can do some partials past failure, since it's just not a very challenging, fatiguing lift just to take to 0 reps in reserve. So if you do want to do partial reps past failure, most people in most cases are more than welcome to try this, and it's perfectly safe, it's perfectly fine. Rows are an excellent lift to mess around with intensity techniques like that. I'm not saying it's mandatory to grow because I'm not even doing it, but it is a good option if you do feel like you need to get more out of the lift than just taking it to 0 reps in reserve like I do here. So like I said, keep the shoulder down, keep the shoulder blade down, pull it tight to your body. You can even face slightly away, so face slightly to the arm that you're pulling, and that will get a little bit more of a length and bias, get a little bit more of a lat stretch. One thing I like to do when I first start that movement, right before the first rep, I let tension go into the lat by moving the weight off of the stack. So I pull back a couple inches, and I just adjust my torso, lean in a couple ways to really figure out what gets me in that right position where I feel the lat stretch the most. So a little bit of bro science, but also execution is obviously important. Mind-muscle connection is just an indicator that you have proper execution and proper setup. Up next, we're doing the pec deck. This felt actually pretty great because it's just an incredible machine. This is not something that's normally in my program. This is just something that it's at the gym, and why not take advantage of it because it's such an incredible machine. The tension is basically constant, so what people think cables will do, the pec deck actually does. Since it's a machine, they can engineer it so there's tension throughout the entire range of motion. So it's pretty incredible versus a cable or a dumbbell where the tension does fall off at certain points of the range of motion. So it kind of gets everything in one. Up next, this is basically the same machine I have at the home gym, so as you can see, I'm trying to do most things how I normally would for this upper body session. And with that said, I did decide to keep this machine in the program for this day. I just love this machine so much that while I do have access to more variety to keep it fun and keep it exciting, I just love this machine so much to the point where I'd rather just do the same thing because I like it than try something different just because I have access to something different. So I don't know what it is on here, but I'm a little bit stronger on this machine than the one at my home gym. There's got to be something that's a little bit different with the tension curve or just how the weights disperse, the length of the lever arm itself. So it was a bit odd. I had to experiment with the weight a little bit, going a little heavier on this one than I normally do. But needless to say, it felt great. Same concept on there. It's a lat biased. I train my traps through rows and other variations on my lower days typically, or my pull dedicated day. So with this one, I'm trying to keep my elbow tight and just pull my elbow down, keep my shoulder depressed as well. It's the same concept, just from a higher pull versus those cabled rows that I did earlier in the session. Up next, preacher curls. Went a little bit heavier than I probably should have here. I didn't feel like loading 25, a 10, a 5, and a 2.5 and trying to find all those plates all over the gym, so I just grabbed the 45s and quote-unquote ego lifted, basically just lazy lifted actually, because a 45 is easier to grab than 5 different plates for each side that are much smaller. Up next, onto the functional trainer that I desperately want. However, it is $10,000, so I think I'll stick to using the commercial gym for this one. These are length and biased cable lateral raises. As far as technique goes on here, there's a couple things to keep in mind. If you're using the cuff, or regardless, if you're not using the cuff and you're just using a regular D handle, I do recommend doing these from behind the back because one, you can get a little bit more of a stretch, and two, because I recommend using a slightly open stance. You can see I'm facing slightly away from the cable. I'm not facing directly in line with it. And the reason for that is so you can raise in the scapular plane. So when you're doing a lateral raise, if you try and go directly out to your side, you're going to notice that the traps do tend to take over because your shoulder blade's not moving in the right position that it needs to. When you open up a little bit, you can raise somewhere between 15, 30, maybe 45 degrees in front of you, almost like a front raise. So this is a much more natural way to train the delts, and it will isolate the side delts a little bit better. The reason why you have to go behind the back when you do this is because the front of your hip will actually go in the quote-unquote bar path that you need to raise in if you were to go in front of you. So as much as it would be helpful to move that line into the right position, the hips will just cancel it out, so go behind the back and problem solved. I would definitely recommend trying that out with those tips. I also definitely recommend the cuff, especially if you're pretty strong. You don't want your wrist extensors limiting you on that lift. Up next, we've got my favorite new gimmicky exercise. It's called the Katana extension, most commonly. This one I typically do on my cable station at home. This one's obviously a functional trainer, so it's a little bit different, but generally it's the same thing. The origin of the cable is just lower because I have to travel farther, so it pretty much just felt the same. It's a great lift. It lets you work the long head of the tricep in a really great way. When you're going super tucked and your elbows are close to your ears and you're pulling from behind you forwards, it can feel a little bit awkward on the shoulders and shoulder blades. So being able to pull from each side and go mostly to your side tends to feel a little bit better, I find, for myself and for most people too. So if you haven't tried that, it's gimmicky for sure, but it's actually a great lift. With that being said, that's all I got for today. I'll see you guys in the next one.